Welcome back to Faith Roots live on YouTube, and today I'm starting a little series of readings and meditations based around this book. This is called The Valley of Vision. The Valley of Vision is a collection of Puritan prayers. So my aim is to read one of the prayers, to give you some linked Bible readings and to just share some thoughts as well. Now these prayers are about 500 years old, I guess. They're very old, and so they're mainly written in older English. What I'm going to try and do is where that could be problematical, and particularly the use of things like these and thous, I will try and update slightly without us losing the sort of the richness of the language as well. The first prayer is actually called the Valley of Vision. It's the title prayer, if you like, that introduces the book. So I'm going to read that for you shortly. And what I'd encourage you to do, maybe you want to pause the video after the prayer, is to read two Bible passages. Psalm 23 and Ezekiel 37, and they will help us as we meditate and reflect. So here is the prayer. The Valley of Vision. Lord, high and holy, meek and lowly, you have brought me to the Valley of Vision, where I live in the depths, but see you in the heights. Hemmed in by mountains of sin, I behold your glory. Let me learn by paradox that the way down is the way up, that to be low is to be high, that the broken heart is the healed heart, that the contrite spirit is the rejoicing spirit, that the repenting soul is the victorious soul, that to have nothing is to possess all, that to bear the cross is to wear the crown, that to give is to receive, that the valley is the place of vision. Lord, in the daytime stars can be seen from deepest wells, and the deeper the wells, the brighter your stars shine. Let me find your light in my darkness, your life in my death, your joy in my sorrow, your grace in my sin, your riches in my poverty, your glory in my valley. I just find those words so moving and so helpful. Particularly, I'm speaking now in the context of the coronavirus pandemic and the free lockdowns that we in the United Kingdom have experienced. The loss of life has been devastating. The effect on many people's health, but also the way that this virus and this pandemic has just shattered society, as we've had to socially distance, as shops and cinemas, pubs and clubs, restaurants and cafes, churches and auditoriums and sports venues have had to close down, as we've had to lock ourselves at home, as we've had to socially distance, and we've lost that sense of closeness, of intimacy, of touch. It has been a difficult time. Speaking as a Christian who's been involved in pastoral ministry, I've seen the effect on churches of not being able to meet physically, and on Christians who have found it hard going through this past year. We've been personally affected. Back in November 2019, I was signed off sick with depression. I don't want to go into the details here of the build-up to that or the aftermath, but I will be open. It was not an easy time for us. There were challenges within the life of the church. And then we went straight from that into the pandemic. And I know that sadly through that time, and for all sorts of reasons, I was probably not engaged in the same way that I would normally have been, but trying to do my best, that it was hard for the church. That church is probably not unusual in that it will have lost people. We'd grown, we'd multiplied congregations, but the reality is that it is down to one congregation now. That is probably not an unusual story of the effect that has happened. I certainly looked back and just felt shattered by things, that I was in the valley. So reading a prayer from several hundred years ago that reminds us of God's grace in the valley, of God's ability to speak in the valley, is so helpful. In Psalm 23, David describes his experience of being shepherded by the Lord. The Lord brings him to green pastures where he is fed, to living waters where he is refreshed. The Lord places a banquet in front of him, in front of all of his enemies. But the Lord also leads him through a valley that David describes as the valley of the shadow of death, a death-like experience. God leads him through that valley. And in that valley, although times are hard for David, he has nothing to fear. I will fear no evil. Maybe it is in that death-like, shadowy experience, that valley journey, that David learns to sing, "The Lord is my shepherd," that learns to see God's good provision and learns to look forward to the joy of victory and vindication. We may have been in a valley, but I believe that in this valley experience, God teaches us to see him more clearly, to cling to him more tightly, to follow him more closely, and to see the world around us, and even to see the future through his eyes, and to see the hope that we have as believers, and maybe to be excited and renewed and refreshed again, looking back to what God has done for us in the past, knowing his presence with us here, and looking to see how God will lead in the future. In the other reading I mentioned, the prophet Ezekiel is taken to a valley, and it's described as a valley of dry bones, the aftermath of a battle or a graveyard or something like that. But there's this just scattering of bones. And he watches, and in his vision he sees the bones coming together into skeletons to form an army, and then clothed with flesh again, and then God's Spirit is breathed into them. It's a vision that says that God can bring life after death, that if we have the death-like experience, then there is the resurrection-like experience, that though God's people were exiled in a place of death, God was going to bring new life. And though we look at a world around us and see people that are under the sentence of death, of spiritual death, and the prospect of mortal physical death because of sin, that God works to bring life through Jesus Christ, to bring resurrection life, and then to fill what once were dry bones with the life of the Holy Spirit. If you are in the valley at the moment, I want to encourage you to lift your eyes to see God and to see again what he does. If it's the valley of the shadow of death, if it feels like it's just bones and skeletons around, then once again put your trust in the God who breathes new life through his Spirit.